Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the stars through the massive viewport. His hands gripped the metal railing as he stared at the space station growing larger ahead of them. Harmony's edge looked like a giant crystal flower floating in the darkness, its surfaces reflecting the light of 3 nearby suns. "Captain, we're getting a message from the station," said Lieutenant Commander Lisa Rodriguez from her position at the science station. Her dark eyes showed worry as she read the display. "They want us to follow their exact approach path. No changes allowed." Jake nodded slowly. Everything about this first meeting with the Galactic Council felt wrong. The aliens had been very specific about every detail. Where to fly, how to talk, even what colors the human crew could wear. It was like they were afraid of humans doing something unexpected. "Take us in, Commander Peterson," Jake ordered his pilot. "Nice and slow, just like they want." The Defiance moved toward the docking bay. Through the clear walls of the station, Jake could see hundreds of alien beings moving around inside. Most looked like tall, thin creatures with pale blue skin and 4 arms. Others were shorter and seemed to be made of living crystal. All of them moved in perfect patterns, never bumping into each other or changing direction suddenly. "It's like watching a dance," whispered Dr. Kevin Carter, the ship's doctor. He had joined Jake on the bridge to get his first look at aliens. They all know exactly where to go. Lisa looked up from her instruments with a frown. "Captain, I'm reading something strange. The space around this station doesn't behave like normal space. It's like there are invisible walls everywhere." "What kind of walls?" Jake asked. "I don't know. My sensors show that certain types of energy just stop working here. Some materials can't exist. It's like the laws of physics have been changed." Lisa's voice carried confusion. "Sir, I think these aliens live in a universe with different rules than ours." Before Jake could respond, the docking process finished. A door opened in the station wall, and a bridge extended to connect with their ship. Through the clear tunnel, they could see 3 aliens waiting for them. The tallest one had blue skin and wore flowing robes. The other 2 were the crystal beings, their bodies shining with inner light. "Remember," Jake told his crew, "we're here to learn about them. Be polite, but don't agree to anything without talking to me first." Jake walked through the tunnel with Lisa and Dr. Carter behind him. The artificial gravity felt lighter than Earth normal, and the air smelled like flowers and metal. The 3 aliens stood perfectly still as the humans approached. "Welcome, creatures of the 3rd planet," said the tall blue alien. Its voice sounded like wind chimes. "I am Council Representative Dexmore. You have traveled far from your small world. Thank you for meeting with us," Jake replied. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison, representing Earth and humanity." Dexmore's 4 eyes studied Jake carefully. "Yes, humanity. We have been watching your species for some time. You are very unusual." The crystal beings stepped forward. When they spoke, their voices echoed strangely. "You come from what we call a death world, a planet where life must fight to survive every day. Most worlds are peaceful, yours is not." Dr. Carter couldn't help but ask, "Is that bad?" "Perhaps," Dexmore replied. "Come, the Council wishes to examine you." They walked through corridors filled with beautiful art and strange technology. Everything was perfectly clean and organized. The aliens they passed all moved in the same flowing way, never rushing or making sudden moves. Jake noticed that none of them seemed to carry weapons or tools. Everything they needed appeared to be built into the walls and floors. "Lisa," Jake whispered, "keep scanning everything. I want to know how their technology works." She nodded and quietly used her small scanner. After a few minutes, she looked confused. "Captain, their machines don't work the way ours do. It's like they can only make certain types of things. There are whole areas of science that seem to be missing." They entered a large chamber where dozens of aliens sat in a perfect circle. Each species looked different, but they all had the same calm, controlled way of moving. At the center of the circle was a raised platform where Dexmore led the humans. "Beings of the galaxy," Dexmore announced. "These are the humans from the Death World Earth. They have requested to join our community. A crystal being near the front spoke up. They are dangerous. Our observations show they fight constantly. Even among themselves. They destroy their own environment for resources. They create weapons designed only to kill. We also create art, music, and literature, Dr. Carter said firmly. We explore space because we want to learn and grow. Another alien, this one covered in fur and standing on 6 legs, made a sound like laughing. Growth without control leads to chaos. You cannot be allowed to spread that chaos to the peaceful galaxy. Jake felt his anger rising but kept his voice. Calm. We're not asking to change anything. We just want to trade and learn from other species. Vexmore raised all 4 arms for silence. The Council has discussed this matter for many cycles. We have reached a decision. The alien's eyes glowed brighter. Humans cannot exist in the galaxy as you are. Your minds work in ways that threaten the sacred protocols. What are these? Sacred protocols? Lisa asked. The laws that govern all life in the galaxy, Vexmore explained. They prevent chaos, war, and destruction. They ensure that all species live in harmony. But your species appears to be immune to their effects. The crystal being added, your thoughts create ripples in space-time itself. You think of things that should not be possible. This makes you very dangerous. Jake stared at the assembled aliens. So what are you saying? You have 2 choices, Vexmore said coldly. You can submit to biological adjustment. We will change your minds so that you can follow the sacred protocols like all other species. Or you can return to your world and never leave it again. And if we refuse both options? Jake asked. The chamber fell silent. Finally, Vexmore spoke again. Then you will be removed from the galaxy, permanently. Dr. Carter stepped forward. You're talking about changing who we are or killing us all? That's not a choice. It is the only choice for a species that threatens galactic peace, the fur-covered alien replied. The protocols have kept order for millions of years. We will not allow Deathworlders to destroy what we have built. Jake looked at his crew, then back at the Council. Something inside him rebelled against everything he was hearing. These aliens wanted to change humans into something else or wipe them out completely. They called it keeping peace, but it sounded like slavery to him. We need time to consider your offer, Jake said carefully. There is no time, Vexmore replied. You will decide now or we will decide for you. That was when Jake made the choice that would change everything. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It looked like a simple metal cube, but it contained technology that the aliens had never seen before. Lisa, he said quietly, remember what you said about their space having different rules? She nodded, suddenly understanding. Yes, sir. They can't imagine certain possibilities. Jake pressed a button on the cube. Instantly, tiny machines too small to see began pouring out of it. The nanobots spread through the air, invisible to the naked eye but clearly visible to Lisa's scanner. Captain, she whispered, the nanobots are working. They're converting the station's hull into raw materials. The aliens began to panic. Their perfect order crumbled as alarms started ringing throughout the station. The nanobots were doing something that the sacred protocol said was impossible. They were self-replicating and rebuilding matter at the molecular level. Impossible, Vexmore gasped. No species can create such devices. The protocols forbid it, Jake smiled grimly. Maybe your rules don't apply to us. The crystal beings began glowing brighter as they tried to use their technology to stop the nanobots. Nothing worked. The tiny machines continued their work, slowly, taking apart the station and turning it into something new. You have doomed us all, Vexmore said, its voice filled with terror. The galaxy will not survive what you have unleashed. Maybe, Jake replied. But we won't let you change us or destroy us. If that means breaking your rules, then that's what we'll do. As the UES Defiance prepared to leave the crumbling station, Jake looked back at the aliens one last time. They were still standing in their perfect circle, but now their movements were chaotic and frightened. For the first time in millions of years, Something had happened that the sacred protocols couldn't control. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were really capable of when they stopped following the rules. 3 months had passed since the incident at Harmony's Edge. Admiral Patricia Lee stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching her fleet prepare for another impossible battle. Around her, dozens of human ships moved through space in ways that made alien observers cry out in terror. The Retribution itself was phasing in and out of normal space, its hull flickering like a ghost. Other ships in the fleet were doing things that the sacred protocols said could never happen. Some moved backward through time by a few seconds, attacking enemies before the enemy even knew they were there. Others split into multiple copies of themselves, confusing alien targeting systems. "Admiral, we're receiving another surrender offer from the Zephyrian Third Fleet," reported Commander Steve Walsh from the communications station. "They're asking us to stop using impossible weapons." Patricia shook her head. "Tell them the same thing we told the others. We're not using impossible weapons. We're using human weapons. There's a difference." Through the view screen, she could see the Zephyrian ships trying to retreat. They moved in perfect formation just like all alien vessels did, but human ships didn't follow formations. They moved like a pack of wild animals, each one acting on instinct while somehow working together. Dr. Kevin Carter had been studying captured alien prisoners for weeks. His research lab on Deck 7 had become a place of strange discoveries. The aliens weren't just limited by the sacred protocols and their technology. The rules had actually changed their brains over millions of years. "Admiral," Kevin said over the intercom, "you need to see this. I've been scanning the neural patterns of our Zephyrian prisoners. Their minds literally cannot think of certain possibilities." Patricia left the bridge and walked to the lab. Inside, she found Kevin standing next to a large display showing brain scans. The alien brain patterns looked like perfect geometric shapes, while human brain patterns were chaotic and unpredictable. "Look at this," Kevin said, pointing to the alien scans. "When I show them our nanobots, their brains shut down certain areas completely. They can't even imagine how the technology works. It's like their minds have been programmed to ignore anything that breaks the protocols." "You're saying they've been brainwashed?" Patricia asked. "Worse than that. They've been bred to be brainwashed. Generation after generation, only the aliens, who couldn't think dangerous thoughts, were allowed to survive. The others were eliminated by the protocols themselves." Patricia stared at the scans. "So we're not just fighting their technology. We're fighting their basic ability to understand what we're doing." "Exactly, and Admiral, there's something else. The protocols aren't natural laws, they're artificial. Someone or something created them and imposed them on the galaxy." Before Patricia could respond, alarms began ringing throughout the ship. She ran back to the bridge to find her crew in panic. "Admiral, the Zephyrians are activating something massive," Commander Walsh reported. "Our sensors are picking up an energy signature unlike anything we've seen before." On the view screen, space itself began to change. A huge structure was appearing in the distance, growing out of nothing. It looked like a giant anchor made of crystallized light stretching across several star systems. "What is that thing?" Patricia demanded. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Rodriguez, who had been transferred to the Retribution after Jake Morrison's promotion, worked frantically at her station. "It's called a reality anchor, Admiral. I'm picking up transmissions from the Zephyrian command ship. They're trying to force the sacred protocols back into effect across human space." The reality anchor began to glow brighter. Suddenly, several human ships in the fleet started having problems. The ones that had been phasing through space solidified and couldn't move. The ships that had been time-jumping stopped working entirely. "They're trying to trap us in their version of reality," Patricia realized. "All crews, prepare for emergency procedures. We're going to do something they won't expect." Instead of fighting the reality anchor directly, Patricia ordered her fleet to do something that terrified the aliens even more. They began to surrender to it. But as the human ships allowed themselves to be caught by the anchor's effects, something strange happened. The human crews didn't stop thinking dangerous thoughts. Their minds continued to work in ways that defied the protocols. And because the reality anchor was connected to all of them at once, those thoughts began to spread through the device itself. On the planet Karos Prime, Colonel Amy Walsh was fighting a very different kind of battle. She led 3,000 human marines against a Zephyrian fortress that was supposed to be impossible to capture. The fortress was built into a mountain and protected by energy shields that could stop any known weapon, but Amy's marines weren't using known weapons. They were using whatever they could find. "Peterson, what did you make that explosive out of?" Amy asked one of her sergeants as they watched part of the fortress wall collapse. "Cleaning supplies and plant fertilizer, Colonel," Peterson replied with a grin. "Found them in the alien supply depot, mixed them with some metal shavings, and boom! The Zephyrian defenders couldn't understand how the humans kept finding new ways to attack. Every time they adapted their defenses to stop one type of assault, the humans would try something completely different. The aliens had spent centuries perfecting their fortress design, but they had never planned for enemies who refused to follow the rules of warfare. "Colonel, we've got a problem," reported Lieutenant Mary Johnson from her position near the fortress entrance. "The aliens are releasing some kind of gas. Our sensors say it should kill us instantly." Amy put on her breathing mask and kept moving forward. "Then we'll hold our breath and kill them faster." The human assault continued in ways that horrified the alien defenders. When the Zephyrians activated gravity traps to crush the attackers, the humans used the increased gravity to launch themselves higher into the air. When energy weapons were fired at them, they used mirrors and reflective surfaces to redirect the beams back at their enemies. Most terrifying of all, the humans seemed to enjoy the chaos. While Zephyrian soldiers fought in perfect coordination, human marines whooped and laughed as they improvised new tactics on the spot. They treated the deadly battle like a game, constantly trying to outdo each other with creative solutions. Inside the fortress, War Prime Zethkar watched the battle through his command screens. His 4 eyes were wide with disbelief as he saw his perfect defenses crumble under the human assault. "This is impossible," he said to his aide. "They fight without order, without proper planning. They should be dead by now." "Sir, our combat algorithms cannot predict their actions," the aide replied. "Every time we calculate their next move, they do something different. It's like they're making decisions randomly." "Not randomly," Zethkar corrected. "They're thinking of possibilities that we cannot imagine." Just like the ancient warning said. The War Prime activated his personal communicator and sent a message to the Zephyrian High Command. "Request immediate authorization to deploy the reality anchor. The Deathworlders must be stopped before they spread their chaos further." But as the message traveled through space, it passed through the same quantum fields that were being affected by human thoughts. The reality anchor, which was supposed to restore order to the galaxy, began to malfunction. Back on the Retribution, Patricia watched as readings from across the galaxy showed something impossible happening. The reality anchor wasn't just failing to stop human activities, it was actually amplifying them. "Admiral, we're getting reports from every human ship in the fleet," Lisa said with excitement. "The anchor is connected to the quantum foundation of space itself. When it tried to force the protocols back into effect, it created a link between human consciousness and the basic laws of reality." Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. "What does that mean?" "It means every human thought that defies the protocols is now affecting the entire galaxy. We're not just breaking their rules anymore. We're changing the rules themselves." On screens around the bridge, they could see the effects spreading. Alien ships across dozens of star systems were experiencing system failures as their technology stopped working properly. More importantly, some aliens were beginning to think thoughts that had been impossible for millions of years. Dr. Carter's voice came over the intercom with barely contained excitement. "Admiral, you need to see this. One of our Zephyrian prisoners just did something that should be impossible. He created a simple tool using materials from his cell. According to everything we know about his species, his mind should have prevented him from even imagining such a thing." Patricia looked at the expanding field of chaos on her tactical display. The reality anchor was supposed to save the galaxy from human influence. Instead, it was spreading that influence faster than ever before. "Commander Walsh, open a channel to all human ships," she ordered. "Channel open, Admiral." "All units, this is Admiral Lee. What we're seeing is just the beginning. The aliens tried to force us back into their box, but instead they've connected US to the entire galaxy. Every creative thought, every refusal to accept limits, every time we choose to do the impossible instead of the easy thing, it's all spreading through their own systems." She paused, looking at the stars beyond the viewscreen. The galaxy is about to learn what happens. 6 months after the reality anchor incident, the galaxy was falling apart. Chief Engineer Ryan Brooks stood in the engine room of the UES Discovery, watching his instruments show readings that should have been impossible. Space itself was becoming unstable. "The quantum fields are fluctuating again," Ryan called out to his team. "Third time this hour. Whatever the aliens did with that reality anchor, it's still spreading." Around him, his engineers worked frantically to keep their ship running. The Discovery was a research vessel, not built for combat, but it had become one of the most important ships in the human fleet. They were trying to understand what was happening to the galaxy before it was too late to fix it. Dr. Helen Martinez, the ship's quantum physicist, looked up from her calculations with worry in her eyes. "Ryan, I think I know what's causing the reality storms. It's us. Human consciousness is incompatible with the artificial constraints the aliens built into space-time." "What do you mean, artificial constraints?" Ryan asked. "The sacred protocols aren't just laws or rules. They're actual programming built into the fabric of reality itself. Every time a human thinks a thought that defies those protocols, it creates cracks in the programming." Ryan felt his stomach drop. "So we're accidentally destroying the universe? Not destroying it. Changing it back to what it was supposed to be? But the change is happening too fast. The alien species have evolved to depend on the artificial constraints. Without them, their technology stops working and their minds can't handle the freedom." On the bridge, Captain Jake Morrison watched the tactical display showing the latest reality storm. It was centered around the Vega system, where a human colony had been established just 2 weeks ago. The storm was growing larger every day, and alien ships that got too close simply stopped working. "Captain, we're getting a message from the colony," reported Lieutenant Commander Tony Garcia. "They say the storm isn't hurting them at all. If anything, they're developing new technologies, faster than ever before." Jake nodded grimly. The pattern was becoming clear. Areas of space where humans lived became zones of chaos that aliens couldn't enter. But for humans, those same zones were places of unlimited possibility. "Any word from Admiral Lee?" Jake asked. "She's still fighting the Zephyrian Alliance near the Kepler systems. Last report said she was testing some kind of new weapon that exists in multiple dimensions at once." Before Jake could respond, Dr. Helen Martinez's voice came over the intercom. "Captain, you need to come to the lab immediately. We've made a discovery about the original builders of the sacred protocols." Jake left the bridge and walked to the research section. Inside, he found Helen standing next to a holographic display showing star charts from millions of years ago. The stars were arranged in patterns that looked almost like writing. "We've been studying the quantum signatures left behind by the reality anchor," Helen explained. "The data contains information about who built the original protocol system. They called themselves the architects. What happened to them?" Jake asked. "They disappeared, but before they did, they left behind records." "Jake, the sacred protocols were never meant to be permanent. They were emergency measures put in place to prevent something called the Great Unraveling." Helen manipulated the holographic display, showing images of galaxies tearing themselves apart. According to the records, there was a previous galactic civilization that developed technology beyond all limits. They could manipulate time, space, matter, and energy at will. But their unlimited power led to chaos and war that nearly destroyed the universe itself. So the architects created the protocols to prevent that from happening again, Jake realized. Exactly. They limited what species could think and do, ensuring that no one would ever again develop the kind of power that could unravel reality. But the architects planned to remove the protocols once they found a better solution. The problem is, they vanished before they could do it. Jake stared at the ancient records, and now we're accidentally undoing their work. It's worse than that. The protocols have been in place for so long that the current alien species can't survive without them. Their entire evolution has been shaped by the artificial constraints. If we remove the protocols too quickly, it could kill billions of beings. Meanwhile, on the planet Ashara, Commander Tony Garcia was learning firsthand what happened when protocol constraints broke down. His unit had been fighting Zephyrian forces for 3 days when the reality storm hit their sector. Suddenly, the weapons on both sides began behaving strangely. Laser beams curved through the air like snakes. Explosions happened in slow motion. Gravity changed direction randomly. But while the alien soldiers panicked and fled, Tony's Marines adapted quickly. "Sergeant Coleman, can you make that gravity distortion work for us?" Tony called out to one of his squad leaders. "Already on it, sir," Coleman replied, using the shifting gravity to launch himself onto a Zephyrian transport. This is actually kind of fun. The battle became a strange dance of chaos and creativity. Human soldiers used the unstable physics to perform impossible maneuvers, while alien forces struggled to use weapons that no longer followed predictable rules. Some human weapons stopped working entirely, but the Marines simply picked up rocks and threw them with the altered gravity, turning simple stones into devastating projectiles. In the middle of the battle, something unprecedented happened. A young Zephyrian soldier named Crethan found himself separated from his unit. Surrounded by reality distortions and human soldiers, he should have surrendered or died. Instead, he did something no member of his species had done in millions of years. He improvised, using broken pieces of his own weapon and some human equipment. Crethan built a device that could communicate faster than light. It was crude and unstable, but it worked. For the first time in his life, his mind had thought beyond the limitations of the sacred protocols. The experience drove him temporarily insane. Crethan began screaming and laughing at the same time, his 4 eyes glowing with an intensity that frightened both sides. But when he recovered, he had become something new, the first non-human to successfully break free from the ancient constraints. Back on the Discovery, Dr. Helen Martinez was analyzing the data from Ashara when she made another disturbing discovery. The reality storms weren't just random chaos. They were following patterns that suggested intelligence behind them. "Captain Morrison, I think the storms are trying to communicate with us," she reported. "The quantum fluctuations contain mathematical sequences that look like language." Jake joined her in the lab to study the data. "What are they trying to say?" "I'm not sure yet. But Captain, I think we're not just dealing with broken alien technology. I think we've awakened something that was sleeping in the quantum foundations of space itself." Before Helen could explain further, alarms began ringing throughout the ship. The Discovery sensors were detecting something massive approaching from outside normal space-time. It was bigger than a star system and moving in ways that defied every law of physics. "Captain, this is the bridge," came Tony Garcia's voice over the intercom. "We're picking up a transmission from Admiral Lee's fleet. They're reporting that the Zephyrian High Command has authorized the use of something called the Omega Protocol." Jake felt his blood turn cold. "What's the Omega Protocol?" "According to the transmission, it's a failsafe created by the architects. If activated, it would reset the galaxy to pre-space flight conditions. No advanced technology, no interstellar travel, no space-based civilization at all." Helen looked up from her calculations with horror in her eyes. "Jake, if they activate that protocol, it won't just stop human expansion. It will erase every spacefaring species in the galaxy. Billions of years of evolution and culture gone. Can they actually do it?" Jake asked. "According to the quantum signatures I'm reading, yes. But it would require them to sacrifice their entire homeworld as a power source. The Zephyrians would have to destroy themselves to activate it." Jake realized they were facing a desperate Enemy willing to commit suicide to stop humanity from changing the galaxy. Get me Admiral Lee on the emergency channel. We need to coordinate a response. Captain, there's something else, Helen said quietly. The entity that's approaching us from outside space-time. I think it might be one of the architects returning to see what we've done to their creation. Through the viewports of the Discovery, they could see reality itself bending and twisting as the massive presence drew closer. Stars changed colors, planets shifted in their orbits, and the very concept of distance became meaningless. All hands, prepare for contact with unknown entity, Jake announced over the ship's intercom. We're about to meet one of the beings who built the cages that have held the galaxy prisoner for millions of years. The Discovery shuddered as waves of altered reality washed over it. In the distance, they could see Admiral Lee's fleet racing toward the Zephyrian homeworld, trying to prevent the activation of the Omega Protocol. Behind them, other human ships were being transformed by the reality storms, becoming vessels that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The galaxy was approaching a crisis point. The ancient constraints were breaking down, desperate. Aliens were preparing to reset civilization itself, and the original builders of the cosmic prison were returning to judge. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Horizon, watching the most important battle in galactic history unfold. 3 fleets were converging on the Zephyrian homeworld of Zethmara, and the fate of every living being in the galaxy hung in the balance. His own fleet represented the human forces loyal to preserving galactic civilization. Admiral Patricia Lee's rebel fleet wanted to let the chaos continue, believing that only complete destruction of the old order could bring true freedom. And the desperate Zephyrian Empire was preparing to activate the Omega Protocol, which would erase all advanced life in the galaxy. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian High Command, reported Commander Maria Santos from the communications station. They're asking us to help them stop the rebel humans. Jake shook his head. Tell them we're here to stop everyone from making a terrible mistake. The Omega Protocol, Patricia's Chaos Campaign, all of it. Through the view screen, Jake could see the Zephyrian homeworld growing larger. The planet was covered in massive crystalline towers that reached into space itself. These towers were connected to the quantum foundations of reality, and if they were activated together, they could reset the galaxy to its primitive state. Admiral, we're detecting energy buildup in the planetary defense grid, reported Lieutenant Commander Danny O'Brien from the sensor station. It looks like they're preparing to begin the Omega sequence. Before Jake could respond, space around them exploded into chaos. Patricia Lee's rebel fleet had arrived, and they were attacking everything in sight. Her ships moved through multiple dimensions at once, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. They used weapons that existed in several realities simultaneously, making them impossible to defend against. All ships, defensive positions, Jake ordered. We're not here to fight other humans, but we won't let them destroy the galaxy either. The battle became a 3-way nightmare. Zephyrian ships tried to protect their homeworld while fighting both human fleets. Patricia's rebels attacked anyone who got in their way, using reality-bending technology that made alien observers scream in terror. Jake's loyalist forces tried to prevent the Omega Protocol activation while avoiding unnecessary casualties. On the planet's surface, the Zephyrian War Prime Zethkar stood in the central control chamber, surrounded by the most advanced technology his species had ever created. His 4 hands worked frantically at the control panels, trying to begin the reset sequence before the human rebels could stop him. Sir, the orbital defenses are failing, reported his aide. The human rebels are using weapons that phase through our shields. They're acting like our defenses don't exist. Because to them, they don't, Zethkar replied grimly. The Deathworlders have learned to ignore the fundamental laws that govern reality. They fight with chaos itself as their weapon. Around the chamber, other Zephyrian technicians worked to activate the massive towers that would channel the Omega Protocol. The process required precise coordination between thousands of installations across the planet. If even one tower failed, the entire sequence would collapse. Beginning primary activation sequence, Zethkar announced. All towers prepare for quantum synchronization. Deep beneath the planet's surface, ancient machinery that had been dormant for millions of years began to wake up. The architects had built these systems as a last resort, a way to undo their own work if the sacred protocols ever failed completely. In space above, Captain Tony Garcia led a strike force of Patricia's rebel ships toward the planetary towers. His vessel, the UES Chaos, had been modified with technology that shouldn't exist. It could exist in 7 different dimensions simultaneously, making it nearly impossible to hit. All units target the crystalline towers, Tony ordered. If we can take out enough of them, the Omega Protocol can't activate. But as his ships approached the planet, they encountered something unexpected. The towers weren't just defensive structures. They were also weapons. Energy beams that existed in multiple realities struck several rebel ships, causing them to phase out of existence entirely. Captain, we're losing ships to weapons that don't follow normal physics, reported one of his pilots. They're using our own reality-bending technology against us, Tony smiled grimly. Then we'll have to be more creative than they are. All ships, prepare for Pattern Omega. Pattern Omega was a formation that Patricia's rebels had developed specifically for fighting impossible battles. Each ship would split into multiple probability states, creating dozens of potential attack vectors simultaneously. The enemy would have to defend against attacks that might or might not be real. Meanwhile, Jake's loyalist fleet was fighting a desperate battle against both sides. His ships were trying to disable the Omega Protocol towers without destroying them completely, while also preventing Patricia's rebels from causing massive civilian casualties. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from Dr. Helen Martinez on the Discovery, Maria Santos reported. She says she's figured out how to stop the Omega Protocol without destroying the planet. Put her through, Jake ordered. Helen's voice crackled through the communication system. Admiral, the Omega Protocol doesn't just reset technology. It resets consciousness itself. Every species would forget they ever reached for the stars. But I think I can modify the process to only affect the artificial constraints, not the species themselves. What do you need? Jake asked. I need to get close enough to the primary control tower to interface with the architect systems directly. But Admiral, it's dangerous. If I make a mistake, I could accidentally activate the protocol instead of modifying it. Jake looked at the battle raging around them. Patricia's rebels were getting closer to the towers, while the Zephyrians were nearly ready to activate their reset sequence. There was no time for a safer plan. Do it, he decided. All ships, cover the Discovery's approach to the primary tower. The Loyalist fleet formed a protective formation around the small research vessel as it descended toward the planet. Zephyrian defense systems fired at them while Patricia's rebels tried to destroy the towers from above. Jake's ships absorbed damage from both sides, their crews fighting to give Helen the time she needed on the planet's surface. Zethkar watched the human research ship approaching his primary tower. All weapons, target that vessel. It must not reach the control systems. Energy beams and missile salvos streaked toward the Discovery, but Jake's fleet intercepted most of them. The small ship shuddered under the few hits it took, but continued its descent. In the Discovery's lab, Helen worked frantically to prepare her interface device. The technology was a hybrid of human creativity and alien architect systems, something that should have been impossible to create. But Helen had learned to think beyond the old limitations. Captain Morrison, I'm ready to make the connection, she reported, but I need to warn you about something. The architect systems are still active. There's an intelligence in them that's been waiting for millions of years. Waiting for what? Jake asked. For someone to prove that the galaxy was ready for freedom. The architects didn't just disappear. They went into hibernation, waiting for a species that could handle unlimited possibility without destroying everything. Helen's interface device connected to the alien systems, and suddenly her consciousness was pulled into a vast digital space. She found herself standing in a chamber that existed outside normal reality, facing a being of pure energy that spoke in mathematical equations. You are the ones who have broken our constraints, the architect entity said. You have proven that life can exist without the limitations we imposed. But can you prove that it should? Helen felt the weight of the entire galaxy's future pressing down on her. We're not perfect, we make mistakes and we cause chaos. But we also create beauty and wonder and love. We grow and change and become more than we were. The previous civilization said the same thing, the architect replied. They believed their freedom was worth any price. They were wrong. Maybe, Helen said, but maybe they just didn't have the right teachers. We've learned that chaos isn't the opposite of order. It's the source of creativity. You can't have one without the other, the entity paused, processing her words. Around them, the digital space began to change, showing images of the galaxy's history. The rise and fall of civilizations, the slow evolution of species under the sacred protocols, and the recent explosion of human-influenced change. You would accept responsibility for what your species has unleashed? The architect asked. We would accept responsibility for what we could become, Helen replied. Not just humans, but every species that chooses to be free. The entity's form began to shift, becoming more solid and real. Then prove it. Show us that this galaxy can handle freedom without destroying itself. Helen felt the connection to the architect system stabilizing. She now had access to the quantum foundations of reality itself. She could modify the sacred protocols, remove them entirely, or create something completely new. Above the planet, the three-way battle continued to rage. Patricia's rebels were closing in on the towers. The Zephyrians were seconds away from activating the Omega Protocol, and Jake's loyalists were running out of ships to protect the Discovery. Helen took a deep breath and began to work. The future of the galaxy depended on her ability to find a balance between order. 1 year after the battle at Zethmara, the galaxy had become a place that no one could have imagined. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt space station Unity, watching ships from dozens of species work together in ways that would have been impossible under the old sacred protocols. The station itself was a marvel of new technology. Human creativity had combined with alien knowledge to create something that existed in multiple dimensions while remaining perfectly stable. Around it, reality flickered and shifted as the new quantum framework adapted to the thoughts and needs of every being nearby. Admiral, we're receiving the monthly report from the Exploration Council, said Captain Julie Thompson, who had become humanity's chief diplomatic scientist. 67 new species have joined the Free Galaxy Initiative this month. Most of them are from worlds that were considered too dangerous for contact under the old system. Jake nodded, though his expression remained serious. The transformation hadn't been easy. Many regions of space were still unstable, and some species had been unable to adapt to their newfound freedom. The Vorthic crystal beings had actually requested to be placed in protective environments where they could slowly adjust to thinking unrestricted thoughts. Any word from the Zephyrian recovery zones? Jake asked. They're making progress. War Prime Zethkar has been working with our medical teams to help his people adjust. About 30% of the Zephyrian population has successfully adapted to the new reality framework. The others are still in therapy, learning how to imagine possibilities that were forbidden for millions of years. Through the station's transparent walls, Jake could see the Zephyrian ships moving in patterns that would have horrified their ancestors. Instead of perfect formations, they flew in loose, creative groups. Some ships had been modified with human-inspired technology that allowed them to change shape during flight. Others had been combined with living organisms to create vessels that grew and evolved over time. The change hadn't come without cost. The reality storms that had followed the protocol collapse had made entire star systems uninhabitable. Billions of beings had died when their technology failed suddenly. But from the chaos, something beautiful was emerging on the planet Nexus 7. Commander Rachel Green was dealing with the practical challenges of maintaining peace in a post-protocol galaxy. Her peacekeeping force was made up of volunteers, from dozens of species all working together to help worlds adapt to their new freedom. "Commander, we've got another situation in the Altair system," reported Lieutenant Pete Williams, one of her human officers. "A species called the Kethmori just discovered they can manipulate matter at the atomic level. They're accidentally turning their planet into various elements," Rachel sighed. This was the fourth such incident this week. Species that had been limited by the sacred protocols were discovering abilities they never knew they had. Without proper training, these newfound powers often caused more problems than they solved. "Send the emergency response team," she ordered. "Make sure they include Dr. Martinez's stability generators. We can't let another planet turn into pure gold." The Kethmori situation was typical of the challenges facing the new galactic civilization. For millions of years, the sacred protocols had prevented species from developing dangerous abilities. Now that those constraints were gone, every species was discovering what they were truly capable of. Some discoveries were wonderful. The Euthek, a species that had been considered primitive under the old system, turned out to be natural masters of space-time manipulation. They could create pocket dimensions where time moved differently, allowing them to solve complex problems in accelerated time streams. Other discoveries were terrifying. The Nexari had developed the ability to exist in multiple realities simultaneously, but they couldn't control it. Entire Nexari cities would randomly phase out of existence, sometimes returning days later, sometimes never returning at all. "The important thing is that they're learning," Rachel told her team during their daily briefing. "Every species is finding their own way to use their freedom. Our job is to help them do it safely." Back on Unity Station, Jake was preparing for a meeting that would have been impossible under the old galactic order. Representatives from 300 species were gathering to discuss the formation of the Galactic Cooperative, a new form of government based on voluntary participation rather than enforced compliance. The meeting hall was a marvel of adaptive architecture. The room changed shape and size to accommodate beings of vastly different physiologies. Atmospheric zones allowed species with different breathing requirements to share the same space. Translation technology, enhanced by human creativity and alien precision, made communication possible between minds that worked in completely different ways. "Before we begin," Jake announced to the assembly, "I want to acknowledge what we've all sacrificed to be here. The old galaxy was stable and predictable. This new one is chaotic and dangerous. But it's also filled with possibilities that our ancestors could never have imagined." A Zephyrian representative stood to speak. It was Crethan, the first of his species to break free from the sacred protocols. His appearance had changed dramatically over the past year. Instead of the rigid geometric patterns typical of his people, his crystalline body now flowed in organic curves. His four eyes glowed with an inner light that seemed to shift through the entire spectrum. "The humans have given us something precious," Crethan said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the translation equipment struggle to keep up. "They have given us the ability to become who we were meant to be, not who we were programmed to be." A representative from the Thexari Empire raised one of her 6 arms. "But at what cost? Half of our worlds are still recovering from the reality storms. Our children grow up in a universe where the laws of physics change depending on who's thinking about them." "That's exactly why we need the cooperative," replied Dr. Helen Martinez, who had become the galaxy's leading expert on quantum consciousness. "We can't go back to the old system of imposed limitations, but we can work together to create new forms of stability." Helen activated a holographic display showing the current state of galactic civilization, instead of the rigid zones of control that had existed under the sacred protocols. The galaxy now resembled a vast garden. Different regions had developed their own unique characteristics based on the species that lived there. "What we're seeing is evolutionary diversity on a galactic scale," Helen explained. "Human-influenced regions tend to be highly creative but unstable. Zephyrian areas are becoming more flexible while maintaining their love of beautiful patterns. Vortex space is developing new forms of crystalline life that exist in multiple dimensions. The display showed how these different regions were beginning to interact and influence each other. Trade routes had been established between areas with complementary characteristics. The chaotic creativity of human space provided innovations that stable alien regions could refine and perfect. The galaxy is learning to think with a billion different minds, Helen continued. We're not trying to create uniformity. We're trying to create harmony. An elderly human in the back of the assembly stood up. It was Dr. Kevin Carter, now the galaxy's leading expert on post-protocol biology. I've spent the last year studying how different species are adapting to freedom. What I found is that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. The problems we can solve together are far greater than anything any single species could accomplish alone. As the meeting continued, Jake found himself thinking about the long journey that had brought them to this point. The galaxy had once dreaded what humans might do when they defied the rules. Now, species from across the stars were learning to defy those same rules in their own unique ways. The galactic cooperative would be imperfect, chaotic, and sometimes dangerous. But it would also be alive in a way that the old galaxy never was. Instead of a rigid system designed to prevent change, they were building something that could grow and adapt and become more than the sum of its parts. Outside the station, Jake could see a sight that filled him with hope. A group of young beings from dozens of different species were playing together in a zero-gravity garden. They moved through the air with an ease that would have been impossible under the old physics, their laughter creating ripples in space-time that made the nearby flowers bloom in impossible colors. These children had been born into a galaxy where the only limits were the ones they chose to accept. They would grow up thinking thoughts that their parents' generation couldn't imagine, solving problems that previous civilizations had considered impossible. The galaxy no longer dreaded what humans might do. Instead, it eagerly anticipated what they might become together. The age of imposed limitations was over. The age of unlimited possibility had begun. Jake smiled as he watched the children play. They were the future of the galaxy, and that future was brighter than any star.